Alright, this is Big Mike the Terror. We're in the city of brotherly love, backstage here at the Union Transfer. Fortunate enough to get a minute with Immortal Technique before the show here. Thanks for the time.
No problem.
So to start off, obviously a lot of your music talks about, you know, revolution and revolutionary topics and things like that. What's the nature of the revolution that you advocate? Like, what kinds of things would you like people to do, like, to spread truth and freedom?
I mean, I think it all starts with a revolution of the mind. It starts with accepting certain things. Like, for example, that I know that we have different cultures. I know that we are different peoples in some places, but we're never going to get anywhere until we acknowledge that we are one human race. You know what I mean? And we have to destroy the mythology of the way that things have been set up. You know, I think some people don't understand what that really means. It means that you have to challenge the status quo of where we are as a country right now. And I think that some people don't want to do that because they're just very comfortable in ignorance. You know, they think they have some sort of overwhelming knowledge, but what has this overwhelming knowledge done for you? Has it moved you to a better place in life? You know what I mean?
Or sometimes the system is set up to help people stay in that kind of ignorance. My next question would be that I personally see your music as very informative and empowering, but there's some people out there who cite certain songs like Cause of Death and Third World who try to say that you're a socialist, and you know they believe you're a socialist. How would you respond to that charge, and how do you feel about socialism as an economic system?
I mean, well, that's funny that you would say the charge. It's like, imagine if I charged somebody with being a heartless capitalist. Is that any better or any worse? You know, somebody who has child labor to do all of their work, somebody who puts the status quo, or rather who puts their profit margin above the lives of your children or the safety of your family, and the fact that they'll put things in your food that are much cheaper, that make it taste okay, but that literally, you know, are deadly for you. So I think that when we talk about socialism also, I think it's important for people to note and to be very clear that if you're angry at socialism, then you should look around your neighborhood or your city and say, hey man, these cops are here, these firemen are here. What would happen if the fire department was privatized, and if you didn't pay your fire, the fire department bill, when they came to your house and your house was on fire, they were like, well, we can't help you. That's the cold-blooded nature of what we're dealing with, you know what I mean? And at the same time, shouldn't there be services that are set up for the public that are at the expense of, you know, the government? And I think that's essentially what we're talking about with socialism. And it's, oh my God, evil socialism. The post office, socialism, you know, the police department, socialism. I think it's just something that people use as a catchphrase. I think most people, especially, you know, some of these Tea Party maniacs, I mean, I think they hardly understand what the concept means. They understand what it means in terms of an insult to somebody. They think of wealth redistribution, but they don't seem to mind when it's wealth redistribution from all the poor people to rich people. And I said it before, it's because they don't want to be the poor people. They envision themselves as the rich people, or they aspire to that. No one aspires to be poor.
No. So would you identify yourself as a socialist?
No, I think that, to me, I see socialism as a progressive step in human evolution. It's a part of the evolution of our society. At some point, we have to pool resources for something, but without having a free market, without having the ability for us to truly participate in a society and to petition government, without everything being in government control, I think that is definitely a necessity. The other side of it is, let's talk about ownership and capitalism for a second. Do we own the earth?
I believe
the earth own us. You know what I mean?
I don't believe we own the earth. I believe we're a product of the earth.
But that's the thing. Some people think we own every aspect of this. They think we can own water. They think we can own the air. We can own a mountain. We started with a little plot of land, and pretty soon we're going to end up claiming that we're going to own, you know, Mars or something.
Yeah.
Eventually it's going to get to the point where we show up to someone's planet, and they're going to be like, hey, fuck you. Get the fuck off. And then we're going to really find out what our war machines are worth.
So, all right, my next question is, your DVD, the Revolution of Immortal Technique, which by the way is just very powerful. I found it uncanny that on the front, the word revolution in the logo, it seemed to me to be strikingly similar to, in style, to the Ron Paul Revolution logo. Did that serve it as an inspiration? And what did you think of Ron Paul's message?
No, we never fashioned anything after his, and I never actually thought of it that way at all in any way, shape, or form. We picked a random font, and then we put the parentheses around the R to make it the evolution. I've always thought that he had a lot of really good ideas. I think that him and his son are obviously very different people, but I think that he's definitely someone that showed himself to be, you know, a person who's concerned for the well-being of the fellow man as opposed to corporations. There are some difficulties that I have with him in terms of other things, like he had some newsletter out and there were all these terrible racist articles. And I've read some of them, and I don't think it's acceptable for him to be like, oh, I don't know who wrote that. I have no idea who wrote that. Dude, it was your newsletter. You know you can ask who wrote that. You know who wrote that. You know, for someone who lives their entire life telling the truth and then finds himself tongue-tied over something like that, just stop it. You know what I mean? I don't think you're a vile racist, dude. But if you have people around you like that, if you have individuals that support you in that fashion, come on, man. Then at least admit that you had people around you that were doing really stupid things and that you moved on, because you lose credibility otherwise. You know, I did a lot of really stupid things when I was young. I used to rob people. I used to run around stealing and being a little hoodlum. You know, and now I look at it and it's kind of ridiculous. And I'm like, I didn't get nothing out of that. I got a lot of experience. I understood what the system was like. I understood what the street was like. But there was definitely a less painful way of learning that lesson.
So what do you think about just the idea of libertarian or even anarchist philosophy of, you know, principles of self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, you know, the concept that I own myself and that nothing, no other group of people, whether it's government or a corporate entity or anything like that, could ever infringe upon that and have the moral imperative, or just the rest of the libertarian philosophy?
I mean, I think that at some point we have to accept that this two-party system has failed America. So if libertarians are going to come on the scene, they're going to have to distinguish themselves from the Republican Party,
just
from the religious fanaticism.
To kind of separate it. When I say libertarian philosophy, I do not mean the Libertarian Party, because the concept of government itself is kind of a violation of self-ownership. Right. You know, why am I being... To some degree,
yes, but at the same time, if you're paying into the government, if this is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, then it's supposed to be our government. It's supposed to be something that works for us.
Supposed to be.
In theory. But then again, that's the premise of democracy as well. We're supposed to have a representative democracy that is something that puts me and you on the same level as some senator or congressman. And I think you both know that we're not on the same level in terms of how the law affects us versus how it gently, you know, treats someone like that.
And I think that's, to kind of take a step back, I think that's where some of the perception of socialism comes, because I personally think that the entire concept of government is a little bit socialist, and it provides a fascistic incentive for government to get in bed with big business. So I think you're always going to end up with big intrusive government every time there's corporations, and the fact is that a corporation couldn't exist without the government.
Well, fascism and government, I think, are really an interesting thing to look at, because the true enemy of socialism is not capitalism. It's always been fascism. Socialism is the extreme of people being involved in their own right by pooling resources and having that grown out there. What you discuss when you talk about the ills of socialism, I'm afraid, is the ill-conceived, propaganda-born, you know, Russian idea of a caricature of socialism, with everyone having, you know, the same exact thing to wear. Like, for example, I had a friend of my father's came from Eastern Europe during the time when it was dominated by the USSR before it broke apart. And he came here and he went to a supermarket with my father, and he goes, "Now I understand America. now I get it. Like in Russia, all we have is wheat and sugar in the same box. It's the same box going all the way down. He was like, but here in America, you have this entire huge shelf of wheat and sugar just like we do. Only on this box, it's bright blue and bright red, and there's a tiger selling it to you. On this box, you know what I mean, it's green and it's red, and there's a frog selling it to you. You know what I mean? It's the same exact thing. It's just wheat and sugar. So when you look at it, and use these outstanding terminologies like socialism or fascism or capitalism to describe an entity, you know, hardly any of these entities really are exactly what they claim to be. I mean, even if we talk about China and we say it's a communist country, it does have a lot of aspects of communism, but it's also state-sponsored capitalism as well. That's something that's involved in it, the way that it functions and it works with our societies. So I think that it's not just one to point at another. I think it's to see how these different forms of governments affect the movement and the trajectory of human evolution. I think at some point we have to say, okay, well, what is the point that we're trying to get to? Are we trying to get to a free market society where everyone owns their own piece of land? Are we trying to get to a globalist society where everybody speaks the same language, where everybody is the same race? Because eventually, if we all start fucking, we're all gonna look like Filipino people. You know what I mean? Black, white, Asian, black, you know what I mean? Latino. It's gonna be a whole mixture of motherfuckers. That's the inevitable outcome of the human race. I mean, unless some white people or some black people or some other race of people say, oh no, we're too good, we don't want to mix with anybody else because that's gonna dilute our blood, we're gonna keep fucking each other until what happens? Until it becomes incestual. I mean, that's the insanity that we're talking about here.
And to be clear and to be fair, I'm not somebody who's just, I think that capitalism has problems for the same reason that socialism is, and that's because of the government. When the government is involved in capitalism, I feel like it provides that incentive for them to get in bed with business. When it's socialist run by a government, I think it creates that same incentive for them to abuse the power, to abuse. So my issue with both of them is the onset of force from government, and that would violate my self-ownership.
Right.
So how would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, it's not a question of just one or the other. I mean, we have several different other forms of government that, you know, for example, a democracy, a republic, all of these things can be interchangeable. But one thing that I'm going to point to, and it's funny because I mentioned it on the middle passage, is this concept that was actually brought up by a fascist who wrote one of the best arguments about or against socialism, and he called it the iron law of oligarchy. And the iron law of oligarchy simply states that whichever form of government you choose to mention in this interview, whether it was socialism or capitalism or whatever form of an economic system coupled with whatever government, he said that it always will break down into an oligarchy, no matter how hard you try. That is the nature of human government. And
I agree.
If you think about it, it's like, okay, if we're pooling all these resources and there's less control for people to petition their government, then how are they going to, in any way, shape, or form, combat the oligarchy? If everyone's working in a capitalist system and it's based on money to get to the top and have control, then how are the people on the bottom going to petition their government? The problem that I think occurs is when you take that out of the context that it's written in and you just apply it to random situations. We have to provide, we can't think of hypotheticals here. We have to think of true form examples in history. And I think that when you look at something like capitalism, and you mentioned, you know, it being interfered with by government, well, if capitalism isn't interfered with by government, then what you have is laissez-faire economics. And how is that any better? You have an economic system that just runs rampant and has no any way, shape, or form accountability towards the people. I think the problem is that government's so heavily influenced by corporatism that it's bribed into putting the interests of a profit margin over the lives of people. In other words, like I said before, our food is full of dangerous, disgusting chemicals that are horrible for us, but it makes it easier to preserve in that way. So instead of the country or the company biting a bullet for the extra 3 cents a unit, they say, hey, fuck it, let's use high fructose corn syrup, even though this makes Americans fat, and let's use caramel 6, which gives people cancer in laboratory, or which gives animals a laboratory animal cancer. I mean, at that point, would you feel comfortable eating foods that give laboratory animals cancer? Can I ask you that?
I don't right now.
But that's what I'm saying. You know?
Yeah.
But if you had a label on the food that said, you know, this is a genetically modified food, and it's been proven to give cancer in laboratory animals. If you're sitting there buying a cereal for your kid and you got one or the other, it's a no fucking brainer. Now you're fighting American government to prevent us from putting that label on what you have. And Obama's Monsanto ruling is just proof that this is something that the right and the left fall victim to.
And that is an example of the fascistic incentive that I was talking about. But to shift gears a little bit, can you give us any word on Revolutionary Volume 3?
It's going to come after the Middle Passage and probably after the Martyr Part 2 and the Rebel Arms album. So we're a ways away from that. Cool. Maybe I'll make it the last one, and then we'll go out with a bang.
And my last question would be, if you could pick one issue that you feel is the most important to expose and just get people conscious of, what would that issue be?
Well, I would end it with the way exactly that I started it, by telling people, listen, we're never going to get anywhere as a human race until we admit that we're one human race. We may have different cultures and different religions. We may be different peoples from different parts of the world, but we're one human race. When you do something negative and you demonize people, you're doing it specifically so you feel less bad and less guilty about doing it to another human. They bleed just the same as you are. Taken out of their environment and put in yours, they perform just as well and just as bad as you do. I think that that's ridiculous. You know, to me, racism was one of the stupidest things that was ever invented in the world. And both black people and white people are the victims of it. One in being the victim of it by being looked at as if they're lesser, and the other one the victim by thinking that in any way, shape, or form they were any greater. You know, before Europeans enslaved African people, they were enslaving each other, and they were warring with one another over land constantly. One kingdom built on top of another. So I always remind the students in history class, it's not that it's the white devil that came to America. It's a warlike, superstitious, talking monkey that is all humanity, all human races are that. But Europe was set up in that fashion to be one kingdom over another, and we're going to use this person against this person. So they came here to the Americas and said, we're going to use this tribe against this tribe and put this tribe against this tribe. It's not because their race is inherently evil. It's because their society was structured to be built off of war, to be a war machine, which is still what we have now, and which is one of the best things I like about a libertarian philosophy, that it directly attacks the idea of war profiteering, that it directly addresses the idea that that doesn't create a functional society, but rather that that destroys the society. Not just the society being overthrown in the war, but eventually the society that has to violate its own principles and be hypocritical in terms of what it is, the way America is when it goes to war with random other countries. And it makes it plant the seeds of despotism at its own door. In other words, this right hand prevents this left hand from doing bad. So the left hand wants to do something bad and make money, and you know what I mean? So it breaks the right hand. But now the right hand's broken. So now the next time it tries to stop it from doing something bad that it really should do, like invade some country that didn't attack us on 9/11 and had nothing to do with 9/11 and take their natural resources, we can't do that anymore. So now we're stuck in some prolonged war that has no exit strategy. You know what I mean? Because I'm not part of this whole fascism started with the black guy crowd. I mean, it's just nonsense, you know? When I hear some of the people from the right wing, I'm just offended by their ignorance. And it's just,
never heard of
you know, but it's just that's the point. It's not a question of saying that exactly, but you know exactly what I mean when people all of a sudden found out that this government was fascist 4 years ago. Oh, please. You know, where the fuck were all these people during the Bush administration? Where were they when these bailouts were first coming? Where the fuck were they when people were sent to war to a country that had nothing to do with this? Where were they? Where were they when the economy collapsed and we were at the brink of the destruction of capitalism? You know, this is the other thing I want to point out, and I'd love to get your take on it. How come when a government fails that's capitalist, we blame the regime? And how come when a government that fails and is socialist, we blame the economic system?
I would say that it's the control in the first place that government represents. I think that when you interfere in the marketplace in capitalism...
But understanding history, not to interrupt, but understanding history and looking at it from a historical perspective, because that's what's lost here. It doesn't fucking matter if it's a socialist government or a pretend democracy. All of Latin America and parts of Central America, they were all quote-unquote capitalist governments, democratic governments. It didn't make a fucking difference. They were still manipulated. They still manipulated economics on the level that you are telling me that socialist governments do. It doesn't matter what they call themselves.
Oh, I agree.
If they have a sponsor state that's corrupt, then the state that they sponsor becomes just as corrupt as they do.
And the point that I raise is maybe we shouldn't have that state, that centralization of power to do this in a capitalist sense or a socialist sense.
So would you take it out of a federalized system?
I promote the idea of everybody owns themselves, so I can voluntarily enter into an exchange with somebody. If they want to make decisions for me, I can vote for that. But I have no right to have that rule or impose on you or anybody else.
I think one of the interesting things, I think that's an interesting idea. I think the other curious thing about libertarianism is that you're admitting that no matter what you do, you cannot stop human beings from destroying themselves. If somebody wants to kill themselves, they can do it slowly. They don't have to. It's funny because you disallow them to do it when they're in suffering and in pain, dying of cancer. You know what I mean? You won't have an assisted, quote-unquote, assisted suicide. It's not assisted suicide. You're helping someone stop excruciating pain that they're eventually going to die from anyway. And yet, you have it totally legal for them to slowly kill themselves with drugs and alcohol. And being that America's the biggest drug dealer in the fucking world, it has a variety of drugs for you to choose from. All you need to go to some bullshit doctor and get a slip. If we're saying that we cannot control and we can't stop human beings from killing themselves, then that goes against the fabric and the tenet of a protective society. The outside and the outlining issues is, can we get to a libertarian philosophy in action in steps, which is what I would definitely recommend, because I don't think it's something that we can do with a sudden change. You know what I mean? It's
I
not
agree.
like
Nothing ever works
It's
that
not
way.
the different. No, I mean, things in this society are supposed to. When they go from Democrat to Republican, we're supposed to take a different route, but we don't, because there is no different route.
Yeah.
They eat at the same trough, so it's difficult for them to even be accountable to their own people. And now, libertarian philosophy, it's interesting because I really brought up the Libertarian Party because I know a lot of old school libertarians that feel like the party is being infiltrated on behalf of the right wing exiting the GOP. In other words, people feel embarrassed about being a Republican because you have individuals justifying rape on TV. You shouldn't even talk about rape, dude. If you're a politician, you shouldn't be talking about rape at all unless it's talking about, you know, putting people who rape people in prison for longer or some shit like that. Why are you talking about women and their bodies? Shut up, dude. And yet they feel embarrassed by that. They're embarrassed that a young generation says, I don't care if you're gay or lesbian, that has nothing to do with me. I'm straight, I'm fine with my girl, but whoever the fuck you want to be with, what business of it is mine? And yet that crowd, that religious fanatic bullshit crowd who's ashamed to call themselves Republican, is now trying to pass themselves, oh, well, I've heard this so many times from people who were like big neocon Bush supporters, well, I'm more of a libertarian now. You're going to hear it all the time. I see it on Fox News. I love to watch once in a while just to see what the fuck they're doing. Everything is, oh, I'm more of a libertarian now. your big problem, I'm telling you, in the future as a libertarian, is not with socialists. It's going to be kicking the carpetbaggers out of your frame and seeing them try and take over the movement that you built.
What I feel is important is, just like you said, the revolution of the mind. I do not care about politics. I don't care about trying to affect votes. I care more about trying to get people to think more about that. I own
take
myself.
Personal responsibility for themselves to say, hey, listen, if there's drug abuse, you know what I mean, then I have to find a way to get off it. But at the same time, I think that government has a responsibility, since it's taking money from people. If we're doing away with the federal tax, if we're doing away with everything, with all taxation, then, except for income tax or something like that, I'm sorry, except for sales tax. If we're doing away with all taxation, then we have no more responsibility to government, or rather it has no more responsibility to us.
Exactly.
However, if we're paying into a system through Social Security, for Medicaid and whatever it else to be, if we have all these government programs that affect the people, then at some point, you know what I mean, there is some level of protection that they owe the human race on a whole.
I agree, and obviously you're conscious of the problems with that. You know, you pay into these systems, they take the value of the money through inflation, right. And the Federal Reserve, they play with the money on Wall Street. Now it's, you know, legal to lose your money.
Right, it's legal and it's usually gone, and then you have those loopholes for people that are quote unquote illegal, these undocumented individuals who, ironically, I'll bring up the politics of this, they pay into a Social Security system that they're never gonna get a fucking shit out of. So it's like, yo, dude, I understand not being involved with the politics, but I think that as politics become more and more encroaching in every aspect of human life, because of Super PAC and because of all these other things where people are joining up to push their specific or almost one issue candidate agenda through, it creates so many splinter groups of each, whether Democrat, Republican, Libertarian.
And I think it creates an incentive that as it becomes more and more encroaching, people start to talk about these encroachments, and it provides an incentive to bring it up and bring that change in the mind. That, you know, maybe this is fucked up. Maybe I should take that responsibility and not pass it off for trying to impose, you know, through votes, something that these other people.
I mean, I've always had a high sense of it. I think that's one of the things I really came out of prison with, and I think that's what honestly attracted a lot of the libertarian fan base that I had. I said, hey man, look, at some point, yes, the government, the system did take advantage of me, but I put myself in a situation for the system to do that. You know what I mean? It's like, why mouth off to a cop when you're riding dirty? You know, someone pulls you over for a speeding ticket, or someone pulls you over for nothing, and you think to yourself, am I gonna mouth off to this dude for nothing when I know that I have like drugs in my car or something? Shut up, man. You know, keep doing what you're doing. Just keep moving in the direction you're moving. I had no business doing a lot of the ridiculous things that I was doing. And I think that I missed a lot of opportunities to affect people's lives, so I'm trying to do everything that I can now. You know, other individuals can't win except by bringing other people down, you know, whereas I try to win by bringing everybody up.
And that's definitely admirable. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Well, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Immortal Technique over here discussing libertarians, discussing government, whatever it may be, and definitely check us out, viperrecords.com. Peace.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.